Good evening. Welcome. I'm Javier Duran, Professor of Spanish and Border Studies and Director of the Confluencenter for Career Inquiry here at the U of A. The Confluencenter serves a campus-wide research institute dedicated to the artistic and scholarly endeavors of faculty and students representing the colleges of fine arts, humanities, and social and behavioral sciences. Welcome to you all. We had a very exciting day today with Mr. Mumford. He gave a talk at Pueblo High School, met with the USD faculty and administrators, and later Mayor Jonathan Rothschild and Councilwoman Regina Romero introduced his community talk on the south side at the El Pueblo Neighborhood Center. So we want to acknowledge them for their in-kind support for George's visit. It's been a great visit, even though it's been short. And before we move forward, I would like to establish the rules for the Q&A. And those will be conducted, you'll be writing your questions, you have some paper to do so. And you should have received cards to write your questions. And near the end of the lecture, you can pass them to the aisles, and Mr. Mumford will be able to answer a few of those questions. So, I want to thank the Contemplative Traditions Working Group for initiating this lecture series, along with many other efforts on campus. A special thanks are due to Mr. Rick Gettle, who really became the person that literally walked up the street into the Confluencenter. I'm wondering if we had a community of people scholarly and intellectually dedicated to the study of Buddhism, and that really sparked this conversation. So a special thanks to him. Unfortunately, he's not able to join us tonight, but it was in many ways his instigation for us to create this group. I want to also thank Gary Forger for setting up our session this morning, and the other active members of the group. The Dean of the College of Humanities, Mary Wilder Bassett, Professor John Wu, Professor Albert Welter, Professor Celestino Fernandez, Professor Leslie Lambert, Mr. Stuart Moody, and Mr. Deb Ashish, who is our research associate for the group. And thanks to one of the key members of that group, Professor Al Kasniak, who is also a professor of psychology, neurology, and psychiatry. And he will tell you a little bit more about the lecture series, the working group, and Mr. Mumford. Professor Kasniak, please.
Thanks very much, Dr. Duran, and thanks to you for your leadership of the Confluencenter. Before I introduce our honored guest, Mr. Mumford, let me just say a couple of things about these related initiatives that the Confluencenter has facilitated. This Contemplative Traditions Working Group has spun off a number of things that are quite active on the campus right now. There is a Buddhist Studies undergraduate minor that is being launched for this coming fall semester. So for some of you who are students in the audience who may be interested, please check out the Department of Near Eastern Studies, through which that minor is going to be administered. It also is presently hosting a lecture series, and this particular talk this evening is a part of that. There's also going to be, as part of a Buddhist Studies lecture series, a couple of upcoming talks, one on April 14 at 4 p.m. over at the Poetry Center, where Celestino Fernandez is going to be talking about happiness and Buddhism. And then another one on May 5th at the same time in the Poetry Center, Jiang Wu, talking about religious imagination in the world of Lotus Sutra. So again, those of you interested in Buddhist studies, more opportunities, and these are free and open to the community. Javier mentioned that there is also a student wellness conference. There was one for graduate students already held this semester. The next one, welcoming all students, is going to be held on Friday, April 17, 3 to 5 p.m. at the Campus Rec Center. And it's going to be featuring some demonstration and training in yoga, in mindfulness meditation, and in other approaches to really enhance student resiliency and wellness. So I encourage you to consider that. Finally, just a word about another initiative that group got started. That is recently Board of Regents approved Center for Compassion Studies that has quite a bit of outreach throughout the campus, bringing related kinds of mindfulness and compassion meditation approaches available to students and faculty alike. And then finally, a contemplative pedagogy faculty group that is helping faculty who wish to bring mindfulness and meditation-related practices into the classroom to assist students with attention, emotion regulation, and their own resiliency. So many things going on that all derive from this initial initiative. So now to the real reason that you're here. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. George Mumford. I first met him a few years ago. Neither of us can remember exactly how many. We were both invited to speak together at a mindfulness and education meeting in Oakland, California. And I remember being extraordinarily struck by his wisdom and kindness and clarity and his real dedication to bringing the kinds of things he's going to talk with us tonight to a really wide audience. Not only the work that he's so well known for with athletes, professional as well as collegiate athletes, but also with people in the business community, people in education, so many different areas that can make great use of what he has to offer. I think, as most all of you here know, he is a sports psychology consultant, a coach, a mentor, a trainer, and was responsible, in collaboration with Phil Jackson, in bringing contemplative practices to those professional athletes with the Chicago Bulls and Los Angeles Lakers teams. And in that effort, jointly responsible for 11 NBA championships. Quite a record. So the only other thing I want to say about Mr. Mumford, because we don't want to steal too much of his time, is that he has a new book that's coming out, The Mindful Athlete, Secrets to Pure Performance, that I highly recommend. We were able to get an advance copy. It comes out next month. And if you go to the University of Arizona bookstore website, you can click on an Amazon link and pre-order a copy for yourself. So I would urge you to consider doing so. So with nothing further, Mr. Mumford.
Okay. Thank you. Let me get all my toys. Good evening. It's great to be back in Tucson. I've been here before many years ago. I can't remember how many years it was, but visited my friend Howard. And at the time, his daughters were little girls. I believe they're grown women now and doing well in the world. So it's been a little bit since I've been here. So one of the things I want to do tonight, and the title of tonight's talk is, I'm not crazy about this mic, but the title of tonight's talk is one of my initiatives that I am committed to, and that is pursuing excellence and wisdom with grace and ease. And so it might be interesting to talk about how did I arrive at that particular way of seeing things. So I've been doing this spiritual journey, whether it's insight meditation, mindfulness meditation, or whatever, for over about 30 years. And one of the interesting things that happened to me, I don't know, I think when you've been doing it that long, you kind of lose track, because sometimes I think it was 2 years and it ends up being 10. So some time back, it dawned on me that, George, you're making this practice way too complicated, because I had a lot of that warrior energy when I first came around. I could say that the mind was filled with greed for good reason, but I wanted to be enlightened yesterday. So I had this warrior energy, and I just sit through things, and I sat through pain on occasions to the degree that my left knee will probably never be the same. And not to mention how much anguish and grief I caused myself having this, like grew up with that Puritan ethic. It's got to be hard, it's got to burn, and it's got to be this really just hard focus and hard, like really doing the practice, and this warrior energy just without compassion. And it dawned on me that, oh, there's an easier, softer way. And that's what I'm presenting as the power of mindfulness is about. It's about, I went through that struggle, but others don't have to do that. That it's an easier, softer way of doing this practice. And that I started to talk about what I call a joyful journey of self-discovery. And so this pursuing excellence and wisdom with grace and ease is something that is available, and it makes the whole endeavor, the whole journey more joyful and more in line with, I think, the teachings of the Buddha, but also the teachings of a lot of spiritual traditions that talk about things like enthusiasm, like the spirit within, and this idea of love, peace, and happiness. So that is how I came to this, and so I will show some slides and I'll talk a little bit, and then what I would like to do is open it up for Q&A, and I love the Q&A because I love the interaction of the back and forth. So you'll have to bear with me because, to be honest with you, I have no idea what I'm doing. So let's see if this works. Okay, there's a blank. Okay, so the power of mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? And this is a very interesting discussion, because if you talk to people about mindfulness, you will get many different answers, and they're all true to some extent. But the truth of the matter is, it's something you really can't talk about. You have to experience it, but we do the best we can in terms of trying to give people a concept of what mindfulness is. So it's a mental state, a degree of breath versus a narrow focus, a panoramic view that helps the mind make necessary connections in the present moment between information received and information remembered. So even though you will hear me talk about you can only focus on one thing at a time, but when you are focusing on one thing at a time, there's a whole lot of other things going on that you can be aware of without trying to be aware of it. Now that sounds like double talk, right? But it's true. If you were to think about it, as you listen to my voice, if you're just focused on listening to my voice, you can still be aware of your body, and you're sitting, and you can feel the touch points, and then you might even notice that there's an inner dialogue that might be going on in the background. You can hear, if you move or whatever, there's a lot of things you can take in, or as Yogi Berra said, you can see a lot just by observing, right? So just talking about it a little bit helps. Mindfulness enhances memory, that's true. So one way I like to think about mindfulness is that it's presence of mind, like being in the here and now, and I'll go through it. So it's memory, it enhances memory. So bring awareness to the process of hearing, for instance, in the here and now, like I talk about, like just my voice. To be mindful of sounds. So a lot of times when I used to teach at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, it's in the center of Cambridge. So we have fire engines and we have all sorts of sounds that come in from the street. And so I talk about that we can have a sound, but we can make it noise. So if you're sitting and you're being quiet and fire engine comes in and there's this idea that, oh, it shouldn't be there, it's disturbing me, it's a distraction, then you make it noise, right? But if you're able to just notice, oh, there's hearing, there's a sound. It's just a sound. And if you can notice it's just a sound and you have an attitude that says, that's what's happening, and it's not no should or should not, it's happening. and that there's a way of just creating space for it to just be there. Does that make any sense? So the idea is awareness of the present moment, presence of mind of what one is doing. So, right now, you're listening. I'm speaking. Attending to the essentials, to what is important. And so the idea of, like, just this conversation, listening to me, what's really important is, hopefully I'm telling you that. Like, this is what mindfulness is, and these are the sort of characteristics of mindfulness. So just listening, and in your case, you have no idea what I'm going to say. So the essential might be just to listen to see, just allow it to speak to you, or to listen to it without an agenda. Because some of you have been around this practice for a while, or you've read books. And so what you'll tend to do is you'll tend to compare what I'm saying to what you already know. And that's part of the memory part. But mindfulness can be a practice or a way of just allowing yourself to hear it as if you're hearing it for the first time. So it's to know, like the sound, to know the object and to let it speak to you. So it's like listening to this conversation we're having, or what I'm speaking, and creating space to just hear it as if you never heard it before. And I know that's a challenge, because the mind has a mind of its own. So this is one of the suggestions by this Thai forest master. He said, try to be mindful and let things take their natural course. Then your mind will become still in any surroundings, like a clear forest pool. All kinds of wonderful rare animals will come to drink at the pool, and you will clearly see the nature of all things. You will see many strange and wonderful things come and go, but you will be still. This is the happiness of the wise ones. So on some level, and I use the analogy of the eye of the hurricane, that there's a way that we can sit and be still and just allow ourselves from this eye of the hurricane that's inside of us to just, like the hurricane, if you look at the hurricane, there's all this turmoil going on, but in the middle of it, it's this silence, this stillness, this ease. Well, we have that ability to rest in that place, that we can have this quiet, relaxed receptivity where we're just being still and allowing things to come and go, and not getting stuck in the story about it, or not having views and opinions about what happens. Because if you think about the process of perception, talking about sound, so the only way we can hear something, the only way for the mind to know an object is to pay attention. And so if there's a sound other than the sound of my voice, or any sound, there has to be an ear that works. Because I used to work with this guy, he used to have a hearing aid, so obviously he needed some support to hear. And of course he was a character, because sometimes at home when his wife started talking to him, he would turn it off. And so we can kind of do that without a hearing aid. Because if we're paying attention, and this happens often, you're watching TV or somebody's watching TV, and you're talking to them and they don't hear you. How is that possible? Well, because in order to hear, there has to be the ear, the object, the sound, and then consciousness, or paying attention. And if the consciousness is still on the TV screen or on what you're doing, then you don't really hear what's being said. And of course, sometimes they'll play a trick on you and say, will you give me $100? And you say, yeah, sure, honey, whatever you want. Yes, dear. And there's not a hearing of what's happening, because we're not paying attention. So it's a way of creating, in that process, space between stimulus and response. So there's the sound, is what we call contact, when you have the object, the ear, the sound, and consciousness. And then from there's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Pleasant sensation, I'm talking about feeling, but I'm talking about sensation. It's either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then from there's a labeling of what it is. So if we're talking about the fire engine, we're talking about unpleasant, and then there's the labeling as the fire truck, and then there's what we call mental formations, or thought processing. And then there's a story about whether it should be there, and maybe we shouldn't have the meditation center in the center of town, and all of these thoughts and proliferations of stuff. And within that thought process, there's usually self-reference of I, me, and mine. And there's also associative thinking. Or I remember the last time this happened. And then there's, abstract thinking. And all this stuff is going on. So what really happens is instead of hearing a sound, we are hearing a sound and we're projecting all of these admixtures onto the sound because they're habitual. And because the reptilian brain that we have, it's instinctive, and it wants to know when it hears a sound, it has to predict what it is so that we could be safe. So when we were living in the wild, whether it was in the forest or in the caves, when we heard a sound, we had to be able to fight or flight. And so that's what happens. We have these habitual ways of being where there's all this other stuff, and the pure seeing of the object is not happening. So instead of just hearing sound, we have ideas about it, and then we get lost in the story about it, and then there's a lot of suffering because we're upset because things are not the way we want them to be. That sound shouldn't be there. And as a result of it not being there, there's this whole idea of it, and then it's a struggle. Or how do we get back to the moment? Because mindfulness is just watching, observing, and remembering, the present moment. So when we get lost, or when we get distracted, there's an ability to say, and the old way I used to do it is just come back, you gotta be at the breath, come back to the breath. Now I say, all I have to do is think about the breath, and the mind is there. So it's a much simpler way of coming back to the moment or being back in the moment. And I can prove that. If I mention your right palm, where does your mind go? If I mention your left palm, where does your mind go? If I mention feeling your body in the seated position, where does your mind go? So we are doing this all the time. So just think about all the thoughts you have and where it's taking your mind. People have this idea that meditation, it could be good, it could be not good, or that really weird Buddhist stuff or Zen stuff. But the fact of the matter is we are meditating all the time. And if you don't believe me, just think about what this philosopher, Dr. Dre, said. I have my mind on money and money on my mind. That's meditation. So what is your mind on? If it's on this talk or listening to this talk, that's one thing. But if it's on what you have to do, or your taxes, or what your kids are doing, or maybe you ate too much before you got here, or you didn't eat enough, or maybe you really struggled to be here. Do you understand what I'm saying? That this is our life. So this stuff is coming up, and so there's a way of just having time, and it's not just when you're sitting in stillness, but this is something we can do from moment to moment. Is just to be clear about how are we just hearing something happens, and then there's an interpretation of what it is, and that interpretation will be predicated on whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant. And if it's pleasant, you're going to move towards it, and if it's unpleasant, you're going to go into avoidance or approach avoidance, and then if it's neither and it's a disinterest, we're going to space out. And I say we spend a lot of time in the space out. So we kind of go places like mechanical robots, and I think Eric Fromm called us automatons, that we have that process. And so part of looking at mindfulness as this receptive, relaxed ability to just notice, okay, remember what we're doing, what our intentions are, what are the essentials. So whatever it is, whatever you do, you have to know, you have to have some information about what it is you're doing and why, and what's the best way to do it. Now this makes really common sense, right? But that's what this is, and we don't do it a lot because we don't have time. I used to work in the Center for Mindfulness, which is what they call the stress reduction clinic. And you know how you meet people and they say, what do you do? I work in the stress reduction clinic. I could use that, but I don't have time. That's what we do. We're kind of saying we're not worth it. So anyway, so mindfulness is mirror mind. So you can see in the photograph that you can actually see when the mind is like water and it's still, what happens? It just reflects what's there. But if it has greed, or if it has ill will or hatred or sloth and torpor, or just as dullness of mind, then it's choppy. You don't really get the reflection of what is. That make sense? Okay, so presence of mind, attending to essentials, remembering, the present moment and remembering, oh, what are we doing? Or what's my intention? Not forgetting. And breath of focus. So that what that is saying is, okay, instead of having a narrow focus, is having a, just being open to everything and open to all the senses and allowing and just seeing what arises and seeing the connection. So a lot of times we'll notice that, for instance, if we're talking about sound and the fire engine, you know, if you make a noise and it's a fire engine, you will notice that even though you notice that, there's a reaction in the body. That your mind is thinking away and then there's tension. But if there's an ability to just allow it to be there, you'll notice that because the mind is still, that the body becomes still. And that there's this mind-body relationship. So sometimes when the body is keyed up, because we get keyed up, that we can use the mind to calm the body down by just being still and just focusing and just relaxing and just breathing and just being present to what is and just creating space for whatever we're experiencing. And by doing that, you'll see the body will calm down. And then there's other times when the mind is really agitated and keyed up, that if we do some movement, whether it's Tai Chi or if we just stretch the body or we go for a walk or we go out in nature, that can actually have us get access. That make sense? And so it's just understanding mindfulness as a way of creating space from stimulus response. So if somebody says something to you, instead of knee-jerk reaction, you can just say, okay, how do I want to answer that? And we do that with authority figures. Sometimes authority figures say something we don't like, and we don't really tell them what we're thinking. But in the back of our mind, we probably are calling them a few choice words. They might be 4 syllables, and they're probably not love or help or anything like that. But there's an opinion about that. And so if we can do it, then we can do it a lot of times. And sometimes it's mindful to be aware that you do not catch yourself. You actually say something, and you see, oh, sometimes I'm on automatic pilot. There's no space between stimulus and response. That the mind is habitually reacting based on what happened before. And so we're wired to do that on some level, but we can train ourselves to create space so that there is space between stimulus and response. So you have presence of mind, attending to the essentials, remembering what we're doing, and mostly the present moment, not forgetting what we're supposed to be doing in breath of focus, just not having a narrow focus, but actually having an expansive, just allowing things to speak to us. So mindfulness is bare awareness. And you notice you have the little looking glass there, just being able to look at the bare sensations. And this is what T.S. Eliot said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploration will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." That's what is available for us in the present moment. No matter what we're doing, that we can actually experience the ordinary in an extraordinary way by just being present and having what they call in Zen a beginner's mind. And you can see this demonstrated, or you have seen it demonstrated if you think about watching your children learning how to walk. When they fall down, what do? They get back up, and they're enthusiastic, and they just keep going. It's like, oh, everything is wonderful. Oh, let me test that with my mouth. Let me see what the texture of this thing that I have in my hand is. It's what they do. And so we can have that same quality. Socrates called it, wisdom begins in wonder. So we can have this sense of wonder, this sense of allowing things to speak to us, and that's the beginning of wisdom. And we can learn from our children. And they're learning how to walk, how to have a relationship to your experience that gives us this enthusiastic sort of participatory attitude that we want to participate and we want to be there fully. Nothing else exists but what I'm doing right now. So the perceptual process, I talked about this a little bit. It's the receptive phase, is very short. So active phase involves self-reference, associative thinking, abstract thinking, and more details. So the power of mindfulness elongates the receptive process or phase and creates more space between stimulus and response. The practice of mindfulness, and it's interesting because you hear people talk about mindfulness, and sometimes they're talking about mindfulness, but mindfulness needs to be supported by other factors. So just like Eric Fromm talks about in his book, The Art of Loving, he talks about sometimes to do things, you have to do things indirectly that affects what you're doing, like discipline and concentration and patience. So in this case, trust is a supportive factor. Wisdom, I talked about mindfulness and wisdom occurring together. Energy or spirit, and poise or steadiness of mind. And of course, one of my favorite coaches is a man that they call him the Wizard of Westwood. His name was John Wooden. And his definition of poise is just being yourself. I love that. And so on some level, this whole endeavor is about self-discovery and just being ourselves no matter what, wherever we go. So as John Kabat-Zinn demonstrated in his book, wherever you go, there you are. That is what's possible, is if we know who we are and if we can have this steadiness of mind, that we're able, no matter how much turmoil, we can be like the eye of the hurricane and be still. So the interesting thing about the power of mindfulness, mindfulness cultivates and balances, among other things. So you have trust and wisdom. So it balances those two things. So trust is very, very important because how we view things is really important. Albert Einstein said that one of the most important decisions we have is to discover or to make the decision whether the universe is friendly or not. And if it's friendly, then we will use all our resources to develop more wisdom and understanding. If it's unfriendly, then we use all our resources to kill, cut off, or to do whatever we need to do to avoid the threat. And so I like to talk about the proverbial glass being half empty or half full. Both are right. But if you perceive it as half full, then there's a sense of scarcity and anxiety and all sorts of things. And if you see it as half full, then you have an attitude of gratitude, and then there's a positive outlook which actually enhances your cognitive functioning so that you can think better, you can feel certain things, and then all of a sudden you're seeing a wide spectrum of possibility rather than the narrow focus that happens when you're coming from a place of anxiety and fear. So it's balancing that. Now you have some people, like young kids sometimes, they have so much trust that it becomes Pollyanna-ish or becomes unrealistic. So it has to be balanced with wisdom, with what is and what the evidence is. And so you can see, especially if you're around here, and if you're, I won't get into politics, but let's just say that you can have so much wisdom that you become cynical. So that's where balancing cynicism with faith and trust is really important. So to be too trusting is not quite right. To be too cynical because you know everything and you know that there's a lot of danger about, that's not quite it. And of course, the Buddha talked about the middle way. So balancing, mindfulness helps us to balance so that we have faith, but we also have, we test it. We ask questions. Is that true? What is that? We use our ability to be rational and be able to reflect and say, okay, is that true? And to investigate, to explore. And so when we have doubt, we don't just say I have doubt and become frozen. We have doubt and then we decide, okay, let's investigate. What is this? What are the principles involved? Asking questions, investigating, exploring. And so that's the power of mindfulness, comes from it balancing and cultivating these qualities of trust so that there's enough faith to even make effort to do something. And that we're making effort, but the effort is going to be balanced with steadiness of mind. So we talk about diligence. So diligence is a persistent or continuous application of energy. It's usually emotional energy of something. So you're applying energy to something continuously, but in a balanced way. It has to be balanced. It can't be like me, too much striving, because you get burned out, you get tired. It has to be a balanced energy. Make sense? And then the poise, steadiness of mind, well, what's that about? That's being calm. And so I learned when I first came around, concentration is just focusing on one thing and developing these states of concentration. Well, I used to be so concentrated, I gave myself a headache because I was trying so hard. I was like, just one thing. And then I realized, no, the ultimate stress reducer is wisdom. There's an understanding that, that you can get calm just by calmly thinking about things and saying, well, what is this? What's the best way to achieve what I want to achieve? And you start understanding, okay, so when I hear a sound and I make it noise, I am creating suffering. But if I understand that it's just a sound and I have this option of creating space, then all of a sudden I hear the sound and I'm calm. I don't move because I know it's not a problem. And that's just a low thing, but we can do that with a lot of things. As we start to understand how things work, how this body, this mind works, how the universe works, when we start understanding that, there's a comfort that comes from knowing how things are. And so there's one way of developing calm or concentration or focus. It's this hard focusing thing, but there's another way of just being relaxed and just observing things. And just like you're doing a puzzle, that you get one piece of the puzzle, and by having mindfulness and wisdom, we start to collect. Each time we go over the terrain, we pick up a little something, and it's like walking in mist. And then at some point, we have enough information and we get a full picture of what's happening. This is what this process can be, and it can be joyful instead of being rigid like me and then sitting down and then dreading meditating because it's a struggle. It's like having a job versus having a calling. You're like, you're joyful, you want to do it, you can't, there's enthusiasm instead of saying, okay, this is going to be awful and I'm not looking forward to it. And you can test that theory out. If I were to say to all of you that when you left here, I don't know what your desire is, let's assume you like money, okay? And if I say you just won the lottery, I guarantee you, when you leave this room, your feet might not touch the ground going to collect whatever it is. But if I say to you, okay, there's a dentist out there and you're going to get a root canal, or whatever it is you dread, I guarantee you, you're going to drag. There's no way you're going to have energy. And so we need to understand that by understanding things and making things joyful, and the thing about learning for learning's sake is that it creates, it releases dopamine. Now you know what dope is, right? You feel good. And what it does, it not only helps you feel good, but it enhances your learning centers so that you learn even better. And so what I'm offering here is this joyful journey, and it's understanding mindfulness in a way where it's not just mindfulness, but it's trust, there's wisdom, there's energy and poise. And that mindfulness is very helpful in cultivating that stuff. So now I talk about what is trust, and the proverbial glass being half full. Results of practice bring desired result, a lessening or end of suffering. So this is where it can be a joyful journey, and as any difficulty that comes up, any doubt we have is actually a proximate cause of wisdom, because it's telling us we need to get more information, or we need to think about how we're seeing things. What is wisdom? So look at wisdom as information. Intelligence is thinking intelligently about something, or insight or direct knowledge. So when I talked about the example of hearing, what I'm also saying is that's a concept. So for now, for you to be practicing and you're sitting there and you have the experience of seeing it, hearing it as just sound without making it noise, then you have a direct experience of it. Then it becomes deep. It becomes something you understand. And so that's what we're trying to do. So whatever I offer you, I'm saying, check it out and see if it's true. Because you have to go from information to give you an idea of what to look for. Then intelligence rationally thinking about it, does it make sense, and using your intelligence. And then the third way is direct knowledge. So each time you're looking at something, mindfulness, it might be just information. Might be mindfulness and understanding how the universe works, or understanding how the mind-body works. And then by doing that and continuing to investigate and to be mindful of it, that you're picking up more and more knowledge, and at some point you get enough information where it becomes a direct experience. Now see, it's also me just noticing, okay, this is what this does. I don't get upset and I start throwing things. What is energy? Continuous application of enthusiasm, balanced energy, and if it doesn't work, I still talk without it. It's not a problem. Skillfulness, diligence, and skillfulness is developing skills, and like learning how to walk. Sometimes the way we develop skills is trial and error, and then we learn from our mistakes, what worked, what didn't work, and this is how the brain works. It remembers what works, and we have to continue to have error correction. And the practice of pursuing excellence, we're going to make mistakes. The idea is to learn from the mistakes without identifying with them. So ardency is making the effort with the intention of succeeding. So all these things are really important. What is poise? So it's steadiness of mind beyond likes and dislikes. So when we start seeing when we like something, that's probably going to be consistent with approach. And if we don't like something, it's going to be consistent with avoidance. And if it's neither like or dislike, and we don't know what we're doing, it's probably going to be spacing out. Stillness, centeredness. I think I'm done with that. So anyway, so that's my view of the power of mindfulness. So it's not like mindfulness by itself is not helpful, and some people can just be mindful and call mindfulness a bunch of things. But I think if we start talking about it in terms of being supported by diligence or energy, being supported by steadiness of mind, the wisdom factor, and that we have to balance faith with wisdom, effort with steadiness of mind, and that mindfulness in and of itself is like the crown jewel, but by itself is not enough. So if you're mindful of something, so you develop mindfulness, and then so let's say if you are, I don't know what skill we want to talk about. Let's just talk about listening to another person speak. So if we know what the essence is, if we understand, like communication, for instance, if you're communicating or receiving, there's only 7% of communication is the words. The other 93% is tonality and body language, or nonverbal communication. And so if we understand that if we're going to listen to somebody and do deep listening, do we have the faith and can we make the effort to just listen to what they're saying before they say it? Because if you're anything like I was, sometimes I'd be listening to you, but I'd be trying to formulate the answer before I hear what the question is. And so it's like this listening, because listening entails vulnerability, because it means we can be influenced. So if we just listen without what we know or knowing where this is going, and I'm guilty of this with my significant other, sometimes I don't give her a chance to say what she says. I already know what she's saying, and I don't give her an answer. And then when she tells me what she wants, I say, oh, I didn't listen. I should let her speak. But we do this, and it's not about making myself bad or anything. It's just noticing, oh, there's this habitual way of being with her when I'm not able to just be vulnerable enough to listen to what she's saying and act like I don't know anything. But that humility, or this not knowing, and this willingness to be influenced is really, it can be scary. It can be an existential boundary situation, because there's unpleasantness. But if we can just be still and listen to each other, it will change, it will transform what people are saying, and we might even learn something. And so that's one of the ways of applying it, is just knowing what the principles are and interpersonal relationships. And Stephen Covey talks about that. He talks about paradigm of abundance. He talks about think win-win. Seek to understand, then to be understood. So if we have that information, then we can use the mindfulness to know, okay, the mindfulness and the knowing, clearly knowing, or the wisdom can be helpful for us to really have an experience. And so I'll stop at that, but I wanted to use that experience of what's possible by just being still and knowing or realizing that mindfulness is a way of creating that the eye of the hurricane, and that we can actually expand the area we inhabit in terms of the stillness and the silence and just being, instead of being so focused on doing. So I think I'll end with that and just open it up for questions. Okay. Huh? Okay. Let me see. So one of the things I do is I record everything every time I give a talk. And the reason I do that for several reasons. One reason is because I want to see what works and what doesn't. The other reason I do it is because they're inspiring. Now that sounds kind of weird, right? But the fact of the matter is, when I'm speaking, if I'm speaking, I'm not really listening and saying, oh, because if I'm focused on how I'm doing and not on what I'm doing, it's not going to have the same quality. Make sense? So here's the first question. What are your thoughts regarding trainers, coaches, talking during training sessions? Does it help or hurt the mindfulness process? That's an interesting question. And of course, it's all situational. So I think obviously there's times when you have to talk to direct, is what I call directed thought. So there's some students or people that we teach where you have to show them. You have to sit down and show them what you mean. Some people you can just tell them what you want them to do and they'll do it. And some people are kind of intuitive and they know what you want and they just do it without being asked. But when you're training somebody, there's a need to communicate. And so that's something mindfulness can help you with, is to see what is happening. So if you're talking a lot and you can see that they're not able to take in what you're saying, then maybe you can do what Gibbs does on NCIS and simplify. Just keep it really simple and just understand. So I trust being in a moment and just noticing, well, what's your intention? Because sometimes we're so eager to teach somebody that we may be overzealous in what we're trying to impart. And so we might be communicating more than just words. It might be a little anxiety or some energy that they're reacting to. Make sense? Okay, so what else is here? What types of exercises should teachers use to help students encountering toxic levels of stress? What can the last chance schools do to turn around the environment of unmindfulness? Okay, so what types of exercises? Well, here's the interesting thing. I call it holding the space, and I learned this. I had the theory, but I see it when I teach people. And Phil Jackson, let's talk about Phil Jackson. So it was the first year I worked with him, 2000, and we're playing the 7th game of the Western Conference Finals against Portland. And it's the 4th quarter, and it's 10 minutes and 28 seconds left in the quarter, and Portland is up by 15 points. So Phil calls timeout. Of course, I'm sitting behind the bench, and the team comes in and he says, okay, we got them just where we want them. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to be mindful, one stop, one score. One stop, one score. We're taking a play at a time, a moment at a time. We're just going to attend to each play. Instead of making up 15 points all at once, it's like, no, we're just going to be mindful, and we're just going to get a stop, then score, get a stop, then score. And we ended up winning the game. Totally changed the situation. But it's his calmness and his holding the space and having it occur to the players, oh, we could do this. And so think about it. If you have kids or if you're working in an environment where there's all this turmoil and unmindfulness, can you be the eye of the hurricane by just being still and just holding the space of poise, of ease, saying, okay, things are, you know, just like me, okay, things aren't working. Am I going to react to it or say, okay, I'm going to be George. That could do what it wants to do. And so it's just understanding that we have this choice. We can just choose to be still and say, okay, there's a lesson here. What is this? Okay, so if that's not working, what else can I do? So teaching them, and this is interesting because obviously teaching them that they have an eye of the hurricane and teaching them the concept of just being able to not react to things, to create space between stimulus and response. And some of that is developing wisdom. Some of that is training them to just sit quietly without moving. Sometimes it might mean teaching them some movement, whether it's Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga, or just talking to them about or what's happening and figuring out how you're going to create safety in your classroom. And so maybe that's how you do it. You start with a small space of making it safe and making rules and having some safety in the room. Because this is the interesting thing, not that I wanted to talk about this, but when you talk about a group, let's say the person is talking about their classroom, they call it the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Inability to trust or be vulnerable, avoiding conflict, lack of commitment, lack of accountability, and everybody doing, every man or every woman or every child for themselves. And so what we're really talking about is that in that group, whether it's a classroom or a group of 7 or whatever, if we could start to create trust, and the leadership can be helpful in that in terms of them being vulnerable in front of the group and understanding that being vulnerable is not going to make me weak. It's going to give other people permission to be vulnerable. And if we develop trust, then with trust, we will resolve conflict. And if we resolve conflict, there'll be more commitment. And if there's more commitment, we'll be willing to hold each other accountable. And then we will all be on the same page with the same goal, so that the synergy is the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And so answering that question is just really thinking about using the mindfulness and the wisdom to understand, okay, well, what am I trying to do? How can I make this situation work? So instead of focusing on what's out there, just focusing on the space that you inhabit in your body, as well as what you're creating for your students or whatever. Does that make sense? Which is the best way to be mindful in the midst of everyday multiple demands for our attention? That's a good one. But it's what I just said. It's like, so what's important? So understanding what you're, see, because we're trying to fix everything, and maybe best thing to do is just to be still and just think about what's most important and just handle one thing at a time, but focus on what they call the Pareto analysis. This guy came up with, he said that there could be 10 things that we do, and what we tend to do is we try to go through the list of 10 instead of realizing there's 2 of them or 20% that will give you 80% benefit. So this is where reflection and thinking about, okay, what's the most important thing? Well, if you're in a room and there's a fire, the most important thing is to leave the room or to get the fire extinguisher and put out the fire. So it's common sense, and it's because we're in a worry state that the mind is not seeing the options. The cognitive functioning is narrowed so that we don't see the option, which the simple option could be, okay, so what are we trying to do? What's our intention? And what are our values? What do we value? And then let the values speak to what the activity is going to be. So it's getting clear about, you know, what values we stand for or what we want to be a stand for. So if it's love, compassion, community, then that's going to inform what we do. Does that make sense? And so it's an open-ended question. It's just realizing that the first thought is to just have some quiet time where you can just allow your mind to be in that eye of the hurricane. And for some of us, it might be taking a walk. It might be just sitting there and just reading spiritual literature. Or it could be just really tuning in, because sometimes I think the easiest thing to do is to transform the mind, to make the mind that's greed, to make it the opposite, generosity. And this man, his name is Sean McCoy, he wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage. And so one of the things I tell my clients to do, forget about whatever else is happening, I said, you need to work on being happy every day. So that you are coming from a mind that is positive, that is optimistic. So one of the things Sean Accord talks about is, this is based on the research he's done, is finding 3 things a day to be grateful for. 3 new things each day. And so what happens, so 21 days you form a life habit, 66 days it gets grooved. So what happens is, instead of seeing what's wrong, which is how we're programmed, we're seeing what's right, and it works. And of course, that's what Oprah does. It worked for her, so it might work for us. She talks about a gratitude list all the time. Another simple thing he talks about is smile 3 times consciously a day. Now, how much time does that take? That's another way of cultivating happiness. Call somebody or write them a note telling them how much you appreciate them. And what I do with my athletes, I talk about them catching their teammates doing something right. And I actually have to talk to the coaches about, okay, if you're going to tell them one thing that they need to change, there has to be a ratio of at least 3 to 1 to even have them hear what you're saying. But if you want them to be at the elite level, it's got to be like 6 to 1, 5 to 1. That you catch them and you focus on what they're doing right. And of course, when you get to an elite level, when you're doing everything right, there's going to be opportunity for the coaches to say it. And it has to be honest. It can't be making up stuff. But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with this idea of creating a optimism. Because if you want to measure whether somebody's going to have job success or job satisfaction, it has to do with high levels of optimism, because the happiness advantage undoes anxiety, depression, and it enhances cognitive functioning. So now you have an issue, and now you see there's 4 or 5 options you have rather than just one. And so then social support is really important with that. So I always talk about, that's just two of them, writing somebody a note, that's 3. And then the other thing is what they call a doubler. And that is, you have a positive experience, and this is what I encourage people to have a journal. That's what I did when I first came around, and you write about stuff. Of course, in those days, because I was doing that warrior stuff, I wrote about what was wrong. I didn't necessarily write what was right. But you can do that. You write about something that happened, and you re-experience it. So I'll give you an example. The brain doesn't know the difference between what it thinks about and what it experiences. So if I say to you, this is an old-fashioned blackboard, and I do this, there's no blackboard there. But because we imagine it's there or we think it's there, the body responds. And so what stops us from, so when we write about something positive or we write about something we did that we can celebrate for, and we write about it, we re-experience it. And I'd say we do the opposite. We do something wrong, and if we think something's going to go wrong, we play out the scenario on how it's going to go wrong. I know I do that. Not as much now, but I used to do it all the time, and I guarantee you we're doing that. People are doing that. Like you have an argument with somebody, and you haven't even seen them, and you're already having a discussion on how it's going to go, and how bad it's going to be. And then you go, and that's exactly what you get. Because you wire your brain for it. So this is what the mindfulness can do, is say, okay, is that true? Because some of you are saying, George, I don't do that. Because the pride comes in. But if we look, we see, okay, we do that. So what would happen if I have a conversation about things working out? Interesting. They would call that priming. They have these research studies where if you are happy or you do something, then when you go take the exam, you do better. You know, there's even a thing about what they call anchoring. That's what they call when doctors have a diagnosis and then they don't change it, they get stuck with it. Well, what Sean, of course, says is you give your doctor some chocolate before, something to look forward to, and then they don't anchor as much. They actually do a more precise diagnosis. Now, I'm not saying doctors make mistakes on purpose or whatever, but your state of mind has everything to do with what you see and how you feel. So to me, it's really simple about just turning and making the mind positive when we're going to do important work. Make sense? Okay, so I should go along here because I have a few more. How are we doing for time? Okay, so in terms of sports, I was wondering when I was going to get one of these. Specifically, how would you suggest finding one zone? How can an athlete find their mindfulness? So that's a great question because life is a paradox. If you try to relax, you won't. If you try to get in the zone, you won't. But there's conditions and ways of being that if you are present and you allow it to happen, it will happen. But one of the things about being in the zone is you have to be in a high state of arousal. That's interesting. So I'm finally saying we spend most of our time between anxiety and boredom. When we're bored, it's because we're not challenged. We have high skills. We're not challenged. And it used to kill me. I talk to the student athletes, how you doing? I'm chilling. And I'm saying to myself, chilling ain't gonna get it done. If you wanna be elite, you gotta be having some heat. You gotta be feeling some heat. Oh, look at them rhyming, a rapper. Anyway, so there's this balance between challenges and skills. So you might say, in order to be in a zone, you gotta be out of your comfort zone. You gotta get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So to increase your capacity, you have to keep adding complexity. So you learn how to do one thing, then you build on that, then you make it more complex. You keep doing something that engages you and keeps your mind working, because the way the brain rewires itself is after a point in time, it stops firing. So you have to keep engaging it. So when they talk about neuroplasticity, what they're saying is you have to do aerobic activity so you have enough energy. Then you have to do things incrementally. And then the third thing is it has to be hard to do but doable. And then the fourth thing is you have to have a quality of interest so that you activate the motivational circuits. So that's how we rewire the brain. So that thing that you can't teach old dogs new tricks, or you think you're too old to learn, that's not true. To the degree that we engage and challenge ourselves mentally, the mind will keep working. It's like any other muscle. If the more you use it, the stronger it gets. So in terms of teaching mindfulness to the athletes, whether you call it mindfulness or not, just teaching them how to be present, be in the body, and to look at, have a systemic way of approaching performance. And so we talk about learning, practicing, and performing. And so those are the three things, and a lot of it has to do with just that, just common sense. Oh, what am I doing? What's the best way to do it? And guess what? I'm gonna make mistakes, but I learn from my mistakes. So it has a lot to do with just teaching them how to be mindful, how to have a mind that's just observing things without taking things personally. So there's a lot you could do with that. But if you're looking for the zone, you won't find it. But if you do the other stuff, the zone will happen as a consequence. And this is consistent with my experience in my practice, is that I realize now that it's more about forming an intention and allowing things to happen instead of trying to make things happen. It sounds kind of lame. It sounds like lazy, but it's not. Form the intention and then settling back and realize that my best thinking was getting in the way. So if you try to relax or try to get in the zone, you won't. But if you just do things as a consequence of the conditions, you will find yourself in the zone. So challenging yourself out of your comfort zone so you're in a high state of arousal, but because of the alert relaxivity, you'll be in the zone. Okay, so what have you found to be a common trait in some of the great athletes' performances that you have worked with? So I talked about this whole idea. So one of the things that's really important is the number one thing cited by coaches and elite athletes in terms of how they achieve elite performance is the desire and intention to succeed. And that was the thing that separated Michael Jordan for a long time from everybody else, his desire to win. His refusing to lose. And of course, it wasn't just a desire to win. He just had this strong desire to will his team to win, to be the eye of the hurricane in chaos, or when things got most stressful, he was the best. And then when I started working with Kobe Bryant, I said, oh, Kobe Bryant is the closest thing to MJ. Then after longevity, I said, Kobe Bryant is Kobe Bryant. You don't have to compare him to MJ. But this is what is possible for us, is that the great athletes are coachable, are teachable. They pursue excellence. And they're always looking to get better. So I don't have to convince them, they know it. Now, other people who are not great athletes say, no, I'm straight, I don't need that. They're interested there because the comfort zone of mediocrity, or just being okay with the status quo. It takes a certain level, a sense of urgency or commitment to excellence to make people want to get out of their comfort zone on a continuous, in a systematic process. So that's the greatest thing, is the will to win, but also this idea that, and especially if they can put it in a frame where this is why they're on this planet, to play basketball or to express themselves in the way that they do. So those are the common traits. The common traits are they practice, they put in way more hours. So they talk about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert performer, but it's not just 10,000 hours, it's 10,000 deliberate hours, so that you're deliberately saying, okay, this is where I am, I want to get better, so I'm going to practice on doing certain things that enhance my performance, not just doing it because I should, but because it's going to have a direct relationship on purpose, being mindful of what it is I need to work on today that will enhance my performance. Make sense? And so the main thing is attitude. The main thing is, and that they have this ability to concentrate intensely. They have a tendency to focus more on the here and now rather than the past or the future. It's all these other different things. Okay, so there's a couple more, so I'll go through these. I don't know how we're doing with time, but the next one is, as someone who has straddled both a spiritual path and success in business career, how has your career business informed your spiritual path and vice versa? Sometimes it feels like they are at odds. Not really, but I will tell you that I was a financial analyst for 16 years, and I remember I was working with my teacher, Larry Rosenberg, and I went back to graduate school, and I was really interested in bringing psychology, meditation, philosophy, Tai Chi into working and doing it full-time, helping people, instead of analyzing numbers, analyzing people and helping people like myself. What motivates people? What is this nonverbal communication? How can I have integrity with what I say and what I do? And so it was one day, and I was in my job, and I go through it, and I was there, but I wasn't really there. And one day I had an interview with my teacher, Larry Rosenberg, and I go into the interview room, and he says, what's going on? You look pretty happy. I said, oh, I took a mental health day off. He said, you should do that more often. So it wasn't that the job, it was for me, I had to follow my bliss or go with what works with me. But you can be, wherever you go, it's more important that you be yourself there, and that it's your intention and the energy you bring that is the most important thing. And sometimes, you know, it might be that we're in a situation like I was, where we didn't want to be, but I didn't have any place to go, and it wasn't until my butt was on fire, and it was harder to stay than to leave. So if they feel at odds, it's not, see, because we think that business, but it's interesting because I'm actually going to go to the Center for Mindfulness tomorrow, and we're going to have a conference on mindfulness and ethics. See, a lot of times it's not what we do, it's the character or the values that we bring to it. So if we're in a work environment where the values are not consistent with our core values, then there's a conflict. So that could be an issue. So when you think about this question, you have to really look at, you know, what's your idea of spirituality, and maybe the business world could really help with a little more spirituality. And while we're on it, maybe we could do that with some of the politicians. But if they're not interested in it, it's not going to happen. So it can be at odds at times, but then again, we can be conflicted because there's something that we know we should be doing, but it's unpleasant to do it, so we keep doing it. We call it cognitive dissonance. It's this feeling inside that something's not quite right. And to me, that's an opportunity to look at, well, what is this? And what are my values? Am I being true to myself? Am I being integrous with what I say I want, who I want to be? So I'll leave that at that. And there's one more. This one says, what was the trigger that took you from the place of rigid, forced, painful focus to soft, compassionate focus? That's very simple, AOF. So AOF is my motive of motivation. It's called Ass on Fire. So for me, I'm pretty persistent, like that warrior energy. So for me, it has to be painful. I have to have a sense of urgency so that I really say, okay, it's time to change. So I've progressed quite a bit since then. So now all I need is a little heat on the cheek and I change. But that's what a lot of people struggle with. There's no sense of urgency. There's no AOF. And so for each of us, we have to figure out what motivates us. How do we self-regulate so that we do what we know we should be doing or we want to do? So these are excellent questions, and it's really important to understand that. To me, one of the things that because when I teach everything, I bring everything into it, but I talk about what the Buddha talked about, the Eightfold Noble Path, which is he talks about suffering. There's the cause of suffering, which is, attachment, ignorance, grasping and clinging. There's a way out of suffering, and then the path is a Noble Eightfold Path. And you saw some of the path factors, like, so he talks about right view, right intention, which is what we call the wisdom factor, and then there's the one that a lot of people deal with is right speech, right action, right livelihood. Basically, what that's saying is non-harming, and so they call that the morality. And then the third part is what a lot of people are interested in, and that is right effort, right mindfulness, and right wisdom. I mean, not right wisdom, but right concentration. And so that's the mental piece. And so a lot of people are focusing on the mental piece, like the mindfulness, not necessarily right effort, and not necessarily, but mindfulness and concentration. And so as a result, the morality piece is really important because that creates the environment to be still. I say this when I work with the inmates in prison. It's like, okay, you go rob a bank and you come in here and you sit down and try to be relaxed. Every time the doorbell rings, you're going to be, oh, who is that? You transgress against somebody. When you get around them, you're going to be thinking, oh, did they remember what I did? There's not going to be any safety. And so all of these things are important. Our morality, not harming ourselves or others, and then understanding wisdom that, things are impermanent. You know, we have this illusion of self, separateness, and that that everything is changing. It's impermanent, and there's no self, and there's suffering. We suffer because of it, because things are changing all the time. But there's a way to relate to it and act like, okay, it's happening because it has a nature to do that. So we can have the attitude to be okay with that, and that's helpful. I mean, I don't know how many of you have experienced this. Both my parents are dead. I have friends that are dead. I have friends that are ill. And when people die, we act like it's not supposed to happen. People get sick, we act like it's not supposed to happen. We get old, we act like it's not supposed to happen. But that's the nature of life. And embracing that and realizing that can cause us to be really fully present to what we have now, because there's no guarantee that all of us are going to be here tomorrow. But I guarantee you 100 years from now, won't nobody in this room be alive. And I have this exercise I do when I watch, I have DirecTV at home, and with the new equipment, you can go on cast, and you know, members of the cast, and if I watch, like during Christmas, I watch, you know, Christmas Carol with Reginald Owen, and I look at the cast, dead. Just about everybody in here is dead. They were born in the 18-something. There's no way they're supposed to be living now. But this is what we deal with, and we get sick, we get old, our parents get old. I don't know how many friends I talk about having to put their parents in nursing homes or moving them to where they are, because that's a part of life. But being open to that is really important. And so this practice, this way of being, the way I look at it is, you know, the wisdom piece is understanding that, but understanding that to the degree that I can let go, I can have peace. And making peace with things, even in recovery, you know, the serenity prayer has been really helpful. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. That's a mouthful. So if I talk to people, I focus on what you can control. You can always control your mind or how you react or respond to things, but you can't control people, places, and things. So that's where the peace comes from, is just making peace with the mind and being able to let go and use wisdom to understand, seek understanding. And like I said, that's the ultimate stress reducer, is the way of wisdom. And so I'll end with that, because I think we're pretty much out of time, right? But I am really happy to be here, and you've been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And also, I want to thank the Confluencenter team. Will you please stand up, members of the Confluencenter team? You're here. They made it work. They made everything possible. So thank you very much for doing a lot of work. And thank you for our Contemplative Traditions group for the success of this visit. And check us out, Confluencenter, Arizona.edu. Thank you. Good night.